Okay, good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us on this very special occasion. I want to simply note first that we've had a huge row of events this semester with conferences, workshops, lectures, and it was a very, very busy and productive semester. And this is our closing act. Today's lecture and moderation by George Arbid and Nicola Fayyad is our last event of the spring semester. I hope we will have more next year. But I want to take the occasion to really thank the committee that worked diligently and super hard to create a full program and to curate it, to produce it, individual events, but also we had for the first time a full calendar that was pre-advertised. So I want to thank Professors Sandra Frem and Yara Khouri and the events committee of many students. Thank you very much. Our wonderful students are super active and engaged. They're helping with the filming, with the organization, with the poster designs, with the invitations as usual. So I'm really grateful for their energy. I have the pleasure today of introducing two wonderful people and two longtime friends who I've had the pleasure of working with for many years and have known for many years. George Arbid is a dear friend and a former colleague. He used to teach here in the architecture department and was super famous for his intricacy with technical drawing, but super passionate about modern Lebanese architecture, and his seminars used to be very popular. And we really miss that dimension of dealing with regional modern architecture of Beirut specifically, and we hope to re-engage George. I keep calling him, but one day he will respond. I'll send Carla after him. So I'm really happy to have George here, and I don't think he needs an introduction. He received his undergraduate degree from Alba and went to do a doctorate of design at Harvard, where he also focused his research and dissertation on modern Lebanese architecture, more specifically on Carol Shire, and we're all awaiting the published book. He is very active on that front also with the establishment and directorship of the ACA Center, which archives and studies and researches modern architecture, and he's an advocate of really making modern architecture part of our heritage recognition and listing, which is a long trip, but we're grateful for that, and we are definitely his partners on that front. The other dear and wonderful friend, Nicola Fayyad, who I've known for many years, and I want to take pride and say he was my student, even if that makes me look really terribly old, but that's fine. I was his thesis supervisor, and that's when I discovered the amazing talent Nicola had for architecture, for form making, for urban connectivity, when he did a fabulous project that connected the Charles Hello station to the sea. And I even used one of his sections in my IASTE 2010 poster, 2000 poster, God, long time ago. So I'm happy to introduce him formally, to say that he is the founder, along with Charles Kettani in 2015, of East Architecture Studio, which works on multiple scales of projects, from urban master plans all the way to interiors, also adaptive reuse projects, and they use very innovative approaches towards the built environment. And you know that Nicola and Charles were awarded the AlHandassah Award for their intervention in the Oscar Niemeyer grounds, and that's, I guess, what we are celebrating today, and we're going to frame critically and historically by George. George is going to moderate the session, so thank you very much, George, for your presence, and Nicola will definitely represent the East Architecture team with Charles to present the project for us and the challenges and the successes along the way. Thank you so much. Please join me for welcoming them to the podium.
Hello everyone, thank you Waida for these kind words. I'm very happy to be back here. Lately I came many times for farewells to friends. I hope we can still celebrate what they taught us, and I'm very happy also to celebrate these not so young anymore gentlemen. So instead of starting with Charles and Nicolas, I start with two protagonists of the Tripoli Fair. We have Oscar Niemeyer to the right, and a fairly unknown person who was important in the whole process, who is Ferdinand Daher. And we are very happy at the Arab Center of Architecture to hold some of the archives of Ferdinand Daher, including photos of the fair during construction. And this photo of Ferdinand Daher receiving Niemeyer at the port, because Niemeyer didn't like to travel by plane, so it's an important photo. I will not make a lecture about the fair, okay? Everybody knows a lot of things, but I chose a few things that I would like to talk about to frame a little bit what Nicolas and Charles did. So this is one of the photos of the fair during construction. It gives you an idea of the extension of the project, 1 million square meters expropriated and remaining unfinished. This is the fair in its still current condition with this ellipse here that was brought to the project later. The plan of Tripoli before the fair was implemented, it is in this place. Of course, it was in the news since day one. Polemic project for its size, a polemic project because a lot of money was poured in, a polemic project certainly for Tripoli because what was expected was that this project will bring some prosperity to the city, and for reasons all of you know, it did not happen. So it is still in limbo and waiting for things, and probably even little actions like the one that gave Charles and Nicolas the opportunity to design what they did, I think are the best solution for this site instead of thinking too big. So little things will make a big difference one after the other. So here we have him with Amadou Chal, who was also instrumental. He was from the start nominated as director. He had connections with Brazil, and he was also instrumental in convincing Niemeyer to come. The news about the project, of course, you know Brasilia and the sort of recurrent elements that we find in Oscar Niemeyer's work. We will talk a bit later about the boomerang. A few sketches, one of them explaining that Niemeyer imagined the fair to be a sort of big tent under which the pavilions of the countries would be. Originally the fair, the boomerang was supposed to be to the right side, but when Niemeyer was not given the opportunity to build his vision, because he had a much larger vision than the commission itself, he wanted to build the whole neighborhood with housing and administrative buildings, schools and so on. When the project that was supposed to be to the left was not done, he flipped the whole project so that the boomerang will preserve the site from the strong winds coming from the southwest. Niemeyer had this way of drawing. He would actually draw what he doesn't want to do first, to evacuate the idea. He had to draw what he thought was not a good idea in order to put it on the side and then move with it. So here we have a few of these. For example, in the fair, what he didn't want was to have many, many different pavilions competing with each other. This is why he has this big 700-meter long boomerang and the pavilions under. And he didn't want to see the boomerang either from the belly, that is front, or too much from the side. So what he wanted was to arrive to the boomerang, and then people would start seeing the pavilions one after the other under the boomerang. And I will say later why I say under the boomerang. This was his scheme at first. His idea was that everything would be radial, but unfortunately none of this was executed. He wanted, of course, the sort of ville radieuse style, coming, of course, from Le Corbusier and all this thinking of buildings in the landscape, enjoying sun, wind, ventilation, and so on. This is the fair during construction. I should not go too long on this, but I want to arrive quickly to a few buildings. This is the smallest, probably one of the smallest buildings on the site, which is the ticket booth. Many people visit the fair without knowing that there is a ticket booth here that is actually almost underground. So the idea was not to have a booth that was in the way. Niemeyer wanted the portico only, so you arrive to the portico, but the ticket booth is down there. You take your ticket and you move. This is not too costly to renovate. So I think this should be the next in the pipeline. And I think there should be an exhibition of the fair, of your work, of anything related to the fair in this place across the year. The portico administrative building, of course, water is a major element in the fair. I will go a bit quickly. Again, here this idea, the Niemeyer sketches from the original one to the final one with the boomerang. Construction was extremely progressive for the time. What you see here is the actual construction system. So in order to do it fast, they would build these porticos that are 70 meter long. Of course, 40 meters between columns and then 50 meters of cantilever. And then they would prefabricate this piece and bring it with cranes and place it between these two. Very state of the art. The Lebanese pavilion, you know, the play of water, reflection, experimental theater. Here we have Nicolas and Charles and their class, because in second year we did a project on the fair with them that was called Under the Boomerang, and I will show a few photos later. Another thing that people don't know much about is that Niemeyer never intended the users of the theater to enter from the ground level. He wanted people to go down and then discover it from below. So the 4 openings that you see are actually exits. So people were supposed to go under this, and there is a ticket booth next to the theater. You arrive here and then you take the stairs up, exactly like he has in his cathedral for Brasilia. So you enter Orboulet's cenotaph, if you know it. So you enter through the tunnel, and then you start discovering the space. So the scenography in his work is extremely important. I will go a bit faster to reach my point. Also, people don't know much that there is under this a room dedicated to an air and space museum. Of course, it's ridiculously small, yet there was also this ambition. It is this room. And the 4 walls, if you want, or parts of walls that become the platform, continue down and become a cross column in the basement. The water tank under the restaurant, the theater, the stage, the director's house could be also renovated without much cost, and it could become an iconic housing model or private residence model. The administration, with all the polemic, you know, about the project that was supposed to take place there, next to it. And we arrive also to another issue, which is what to do with these buildings. And of course, this is a counter example for what I think Charles and Nicolas did. Niemeyer had imagined this as a housing, experimental housing project, collective housing, again based on Le Corbusier's idea of the immeuble villa with 2 duplexes superimposed, and the fair was supposed not to finish with that building, so you could see through the building towards Elmina and the sky. And that was the sketch he did for the time. This is it here, we see the intention, and unfortunately it was transformed into this most banal hotel you can imagine that they call Quality Inn, and I had it photoshopped. It's called Quality Inn. And even more dramatic are the various projects that were supposed, and fortunately none succeeded to come to fruition. It is these sorts of projects that use the fair and Niemeyer's work as a landmark, but then start imagining, like here, a fake Lebanese village. So we demolish our villages and then we fake villages, Saifi village and what have you. So we've been campaigning for a long time for the preservation of the fair, and fortunately, as all of you know, this year it was placed on the International UNESCO Heritage, World Heritage. In 2004, these young men were in second year. So, and it was a providential time because in the studio we had 35 students, and in the Boomerang there were 35 tram, 35 sections. So I thought that was it. It was the time. So what we did is we gave each student one of these sections, and they were supposed to design very simple things, but taking into consideration what they understood from Niemeyer. And in that hall that is behind this wall, we had a 7-meter long model that was at scale 1 to 100. So imagine it took the whole diagonal of the people had to go around it, and we liked the idea that people had to go around students' work to get to their offices or to their studios. Everybody was forced to see it. And we had very creative solutions. I will, quickly move to the second one if I have. Do I have 3 more minutes? Okay, sorry, I don't know where it is. The yellow folder. Maybe I actually had saved them in one, but I think I didn't do it properly. So I hope this one will open. Sorry. Okay. So each of them was given a space. Of course, at first they had to explain, first of all, understand the qualities of the whole fair, the ideas, the scenographic ideas, with Niemeyer, the quality of light, the question of the material, the unicity of the idea from the detail, and there aren't too many details, of course, in Niemeyer's work. And we get these sorts of, I would say, beautiful drawings by a second-year student with a lot of sensitivity to understanding space and light and rendering it. So they were extremely creative, very simple. The brief was extremely simple. A number of square meters for exhibition. It could be anywhere they wanted. A small room for projection, so there is a simple volume under the whole boomerang, and a way to reach the upper floor. So learn about stairs, learn about material, and of course how to represent these in drawings, because they were in second year. So I will quickly show these. I just had made a little selection to show the big variety inside a very simple brief. This was the model outside. And there was one who didn't really want to design an actual pavilion. So he designed a sort of car or caravan that would actually be housed under the pavilion at night, but it could go in the fair during the day, and maybe outside also. So the car goes outside. Very basic animations, but I love those low-tech things. And that's it. Thank you. After the presentation, I will try to help you in this session.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Waida. Thank you, the organizing committee. It's a real pleasure to finally present this project to a beautiful crowd, a beautiful mix of my own students and some other students and family and friends. Preserving heritage does not only protect walls in a field of ruins. It transgresses the history of men and women, the memory of humanity, our own part of humanity. And this heritage is essentially one of the most tangible dimensions of our identities. It's no longer just collateral damage, but also very often a target, even a weapon of war. We destroy and we then mediate. because heritage can be a vector for economic and social development, and even more so sustainable development. Because very often at the heart of ecosystems, we can create dialogue between cultures and religions, and it can hereby contribute to building a tangible future. This is one of the ambitions of the renovation of the guest house at the Niemeyer Tripoli Fair. The guest house essentially is located at the entrance of the fair, as you see here on the site plan. It was supposed to house the VIP of the exhibition and the exhibitors themselves overnight. And some 20 years ago, as George has mentioned, both Charles and I were discovering the fairgrounds as a site for inspiration, and most importantly, as the understanding of the value of our own modern heritage. 15 years later, we went back to the fair with a different purpose. We had participated in a competition that was launched by the European Commission to rehabilitate one of the pavilions, which is the guest house. Almost square, not exactly a square, and completely disappearing in the landscape, overgrown by vegetation and really disappearing behind a green layer. The proportions of the building itself also did not help reveal it at the time because of its striking horizontality and really this repetition of this structural system, which is almost becoming ornamental, where the structure becomes the ornament. It just gives you an idea of really the state of decay from exterior to interior, and moving into these series of guest rooms, where the whole design intent of that guest house was to allow for natural light to always come from above and never from the front. It's an extremely opaque, introverted building, dubbed by these lateral courtyards, but also most importantly by the central courtyard, understood as really a light well, which, funnily enough, at this point in time, was again also completely overgrown by vegetation and not allowing to serve its own purpose, which was to actually light the space inside. At the micro level, this is how we received it as really a piece of architecture, and the interior surfaces of this building were really multi-layered, really talking about the passage of time, the occupation of the military inside this building, where fires took place for over 30 years, I would say. But also looking at conditions that really hindered the structural integrity of the building, with water infiltration and really the state of the concrete itself, which was in some places quite challenging to look at and to repair. And this was really the moment for us where we immersed ourselves into a process of a research process in the lack of archival material. The only document that we had received by the European Commission was a drawing that was essentially released by AlHandassah, but that gave no real clues or no real, I would say, orientation or clear idea about the materiality of the guest house itself if it were to be fully completed. So we were lucky actually to get in touch with Faris al-Dahdah, who sits on the board of the Oscar Niemeyer Foundation, and who kindly shared a copy of the original prints that essentially at the bottom of them highlight the material selection, where it really started for us to actually make sense and to bring back to life, at least in our own imaginary, the original design intent, but also really that missing layer, which was to really understand how would have Oscar Niemeyer sealed that building and fully completed it. Our primary source of inspiration was a building that Niemeyer designed exactly at the same time as he was working on the Tripoli Fair, which is the Itamarati Palace, which strikingly resembles in terms of its structural performance, but also this ornamental layer of it, where the ceiling is really the primary element that encapsulates the space, held by these slender columns. So there was really this striking, I would say, comparison that really drew us into the immersion of immersing ourselves into really the understanding of this building.
So what you see here is the plan as we received it. It's the archival from AlHandassah. This is the plan as the original guest house was intended. So you have 14 VIP rooms on the left side, which you see here, which are not part of were not part, unfortunately, of our scope of intervention. And the rest of the space is really this open space with an open atrium, which is used as a reception space, restaurant, a reception hall, and it was probably even conceived as being without any partition and without any glazing initially. And on the other side, it's everything that has to do with back of house services, kitchens, laundry, and even a barber shop for men and women behind the reception desk here. So, in a way, our first requirement was which was really a first challenge, was to repurpose what was originally intended as a guest house into what was going to become a workshop with big machinery, actually coming from Europe, a workshop where there's going to be sound, people working in day and night and throughout the year, whereas the guest house was probably originally intended to work only a couple of months during the year. And one of the client's brief was also to add some partitioning to be able to segregate the different programs together. So what you see here, and we will get into those details in a bit, are our second intention, which was to put the partitions not on the structural elements, to reveal them, and you will see more images later. However, the open space really makes it easy for a very circular and open flow of the program around that atrium. And the reception space stays a reception space. Then there's a kind of meeting hub where carpenters would meet designers coming from Tripoli, Lebanon, and the rest. Well, actually, essentially Tripoli and Lebanon, and would produce prototypes in the workshop, in the finishing space, and eventually these prototypes would be exhibited in an exhibition hall. So this is, in a nutshell, the party of the space at a macro level. And as Nicolas was saying earlier, really the roof and these ribs were a huge inspiration for us, but also a big challenge. How to work with such a rhythm, how to work with such an intensity, such horizontality, and even a big part of the budget went into restoring that roof at an infrastructural level to waterproof it, to be able to have a hub that can be used throughout the year. So really, in terms of budget, what we were left was quite minimal, which added to the challenge. So now, looking at the micro level, looking at three moments that we call the DNA of the intervention, which actually looks at the DNA of the building, which are three interventions that we proliferated throughout: the lighting element, the glazing element, and the revealing of the structural element here on the right. What you can see from these diagrams is there's a real relationship of these elements to the roof, to that roof structure, and looking more into detail. So, starting with the partitioning. So what we did is to insert a very thin metal steel element within these ribs to really highlight the rhythm, to play with the rhythm, and to almost project the rhythm of the ceiling at a vertical level. The use of steel actually allowed us to work with details that are very fine. We're talking about 11 centimeters here, something that aluminum would have not allowed us to do. But also, working with steel allows for the craftsmen to bring in their own imperfections, in a way, and we totally accepted these imperfections because we are dealing with a 60-year-old structure, and as you can see in some instances, the concrete settled through time, which is normal because concrete is a living organism. So in some instances, the concrete settled more than 5 centimeters, which forced us to create those gaps, those literal gaps between the frames and between the concrete. Those gaps allowed the partitions to actually open. If not, it would have hit the ceiling. But it also reveals our intention in the design to really be never touching that concrete of Niemeyer. So it's a play of respect, but also a play of reversibility. So the whole concept behind the intervention is that it can be entirely removed. Shall this project be again reversed in the future and would host a totally different program? So, as we did mock-ups, and this is a previous picture that we saw, we tested a lot with the craftsmen on site, and what you see here is the final result was really this play of fixed opening and operable partition, playing nicely with the lighting and also with the ribs, opening up to the internal courtyard, and really this glazing and these fine details were proliferated around the whole structure. So here you can see on the right side the difference between the lateral courtyard and the central courtyard. Then the reveal of the structural elements. So this is actually coming from, again, the Tamarati Palace. As Nicolas was saying earlier, it's a reference that we use to see how Niemeyer would have treated these columns. And actually, he cladded them in hardwood to reveal them. So we thought it would be a nice idea and a nice wink to Niemeyer to use that same technique. So we've cladded the column with wood, but also the drop beam, which is quite massive, which is supported by only 2 columns, and which supports the whole structure. And it allowed us not only to reveal the structure, to enhance it, but also to hide electrical elements such as the tubing and as you can see, they're cleanly going out here to reach the lighting elements. So a quick before and after of that cladding on the underside of the beam. And finally, the lighting element, which was also a challenge because we're talking about a very horizontal space with not a lot of clear height. And the purpose of the new platform was going to host like a program that required general lighting, but also specific directional lighting in some instances, to hide some overgrown plants.
Essentially, we were very interested in the notion of craft, and really the way we would actually bring in new forms of labor into this project. And during the research process in itself, we had to imagine the craft first, and we would like to quote a few thoughts from a friend and colleague, Nader Tehrani, who visited the final product with us, and who beautifully put in a few words his reading of our intervention, where he essentially says that the concept of the reveal that you see here on this image, whether on the in the lighting or through the glass partition, the gap between the original structure and the new is an invention, because the new could have just sat on the old. And the insertion could have coalesced, but it's not the case in our proposition. The displacement of the glass partition, for example, to allow for the addition to almost levitate, is not a solving of a problem, but instead a transcendence of that problem. There's probably nothing more reductive than the doubling of the mullion, or the doubling of the lighting. The idea that this has even survived through a war and still exists, it transgresses this idea. When looking at the lighting that is not centered on the beam, but actually sandwiches the beam, all of the redundancy in doubling is a conceptual probe. It's not merely solving the problem, it's again a transcendence. But also, if you look at the craft that went into the making of those insertions, they're not exquisite in terms of hand labor. In fact, they thrive because of a precise understanding of what needs to be raw and what needs to be coated. And so you get moments of high craft in the labor, but also moments where you understand that high craft precisely because of the rawness of the environment in which they find themselves. So really a few images of that really talk about this austerity, the opaqueness of the exterior versus really the light-flooded interiors, or somehow these interstitial moments that blur the boundary between inside and outside. And really somehow understanding that the space as used today enhances human comfort. As you can see here on this image, it's actually taken in the workshop area where carpenters are actually using the space, coming up with these furniture lines. A few of the collaborations that they did with local designers, some of the pieces that are here exhibited. And really this idea of reflection and transparency throughout this glazing partition. The idea of monochromatism was extremely important for us as well, to frame and to act as really a bracing to really the design intent of the pavilion itself. So by applying a singular color to the entire intervention, allowed for really the pavilion to actually breathe a new life.
And finally, drawing inspiration by furniture designed by Oscar Niemeyer himself, we allowed ourselves to break a bit from that linearity and to create this reception piece that actually is exactly at the location that was intended on the plans of Oscar Niemeyer, aligned with the stone column. And what was beautiful was to really see the space used finally. That's during the opening at the end of 2018. And the space filled by people. And we saw earlier some images of the craftsmen using the space. Here some images of the designs that were produced out of Minjara. So now, for those of you who are familiar, Minjara is a platform that has its own name, its own brand. It's non-for-profit. It brings in Tripolitan artisans to learn new techniques and to take them back home in a way, these techniques. So it's a very sustainable process in a way. And during after the the blast of the 4th of August, Minjara contributed as well to repair doors. And in some instances as well, here we see Sarah Jafar, who's actually an UB graduate and a friend of ours, who used the CNC machine of the platform as well as Tripolitan artisans to recreate the entrance of the Sursa Palace. And they're now working on a variety of different, I would say these are toys actually for kids in wood. It's quite different than the furniture that they usually do, but they're testing different ways of surviving. And what's incredible is that the platform was given light in 2019, and since then it has lived through the Lebanese economical crisis, COVID-19, and it's kind of a miracle that it still exists. So really the sustainability of the platform is very important for the project, and it's probably one of the reasons why it was awarded the Aga Khan Award for Architecture last year, but also to shed light on the importance of preserving modern heritage, and in particular this masterpiece by Oscar Niemeyer. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for this beautiful presentation that not only, of course, describes the project in beautiful words, but also opens to very important things. I wrote a few notes. The importance of archives. It is a matter that, of course, Waida mentioned when she said what I'm doing currently, and every day when I encounter in a drawing, in a document related to buildings, every time there is a discovery. There is so much there that we don't know about. Whether it is architects' intentions or variations on a project, or the actual story, the life of a project, how it started and what have you. And of course, these are the ingredients that make architecture. We always consider that architecture is something that we can simply design and execute, and that's it, and it will remain that way forever. Life is different. Things happen. So the importance of archives is crucial, especially when we want to deal with adaptive reuse. And of course, there is a very important concern for adaptive reuse lately because of the economy, because of sustainability, and because also people are rediscovering the importance of modern buildings. I don't like the word modern anymore, we use it so much, but about quality architecture, let's say, of all times. And if we start forgetting about modern and not modern, pre-modern, post-modern, what have you, then we can really look at architecture and its qualities without any bias. And obviously, the reuse of buildings is something that is sustainable. And I can give as an example the European Award for Architecture 2 years ago. Yes, it was won by Lacaton et Vassal. I was very privileged to be on that jury. And I can tell you that we had 400 projects that we had to select from. Among the 400, 100 had to do with adaptive reuse. Among the 100, 40 made it to the final, and then among the 5 that we selected, 3 had to do with the adaptive reuse of or rework on a square or a building. And the project that won was also remodeling of buildings of the 50s, early 60s, and the addition. But there was also something that was very important, and you mentioned the crafts. They were very keen on keeping the hand visible in the work, and they kept the people where they were. So it was not an architecture or signature architecture. People remained in the buildings while they were renovated, and they were adding to the building. So there's always this idea of the importance of people. The reversibility, of course, you used the word, it was very interesting, unusual in an architecture lecture, respect. We usually don't respect. As architects, we sign, we impose, we like to create, recreate, erase, and usually it happens with, I'm a bit maybe violent here, but little respect to the user, little respect to the neighbor, little respect to the law, little respect to nature, and what have you. So this idea of, maybe you exaggerate a little bit, you don't want to touch Niemeyer's concrete. Actually, it's not his concrete, it's our concrete, because it was it's local thing, but of course we were very happy, and this is why I started with his photo. Of course, your project would not have existed if he didn't design it, and he wouldn't have designed it if there was not behind that project people who thought it was good. Then, of course, with all the polemic, I still think that this is a major project that requires attention, and it was never fulfilled. It never fulfilled its promises, and Tripoli is waiting. So maybe we can talk about this later in the discussion. And Nader's words, very very telling about architecture not being problem solving, and the issue of transcendence. I think there is a word we don't use a lot in architecture, which is performance. We prefer to think of function. Did the project follow the function, or is it functional? Sometimes performance is not about function. And if you use the word performance, we can evaluate architecture and design it better. Because beauty is performance, it's not function. You can say it performs an aesthetic desire and so on. And I think here it's very clear. I mean, in the way you design, in the photos that are taken, by professionals, they are extremely clear. So this idea of not only serving a purpose, but performing something that is elevated is clear. Last, I want to speak about this dialogue that happens when somebody deals with somebody else's work across time. So there are questions that are recurrent in architecture. What material shall we use? How much will it cost? Does the law allow it? Is it sustainable? Is it safe? Is it beautiful? Is it? And you often have to put yourself in the shoes of that person, as you did brilliantly. You went and looked at what you think he would have done. And I think this also is out of respect. And I hope that most of the projects that will be carried for the fair will take that path, which is not necessarily yours. It could be any other direction. There's no one way of dealing with this. But if respect is there, and a sincere attitude to try to fulfill what was unfinished, but at the same time bring it to today with the new needs and so on and so forth, then it would be successful. There were my comments now. Of course, I don't know if you want to respond, but I think we're here to talk with the audience as well.
Just a few thoughts regarding the archive actually aspect of what you started to talk about, George. We somehow are thinking of archivism as process, and we only think that after having gone through this experiment, even the end product is for us part of the archive and will become one of those layers. Even the way we'd actually thought about this board outside, and really the collection of imagery to drawing to archival print to even the scales and the interpretation of these elements together are for us really part of this archivism as process, and we're actually just starting to understand it. We are starting to work on a book that will use the project and this process of archivism actually as a design process. And how do you actually start with research through archives to yield a design solution? And this is a very relevant topic for the many reasons that you just mentioned. We really feel that there's a lot to be said in this regards, and it's not that obvious actually. And you being in the field, an expert really, and making an archive is extremely valuable.
Yes, yeah. So about the respect, it's important. I mean, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but just contextualizing a bit how we work on the project, and at the time we worked on the project, there was no guidelines that were neither given by Expertise France, who was our client, nor the fair. It was not yet on the World UNESCO list. So working without guidelines forces us to impose and to create guidelines. So yes, I mean, sometimes it's exaggerated, but also for the purpose of the presentation. But at the end of the day, the result is also an interpretation, right? It's not a mimicking of what he would have done per se. So setting these guidelines was for us maybe one of the biggest challenge as we were moving on with the project, especially in a very short amount of time, and with no real, I mean, we were our only judge in a way.
In response to this, I know that sometimes architects complain, especially when it comes to renovating buildings. There are certain rules and codes and charters and so on, especially in countries that have this tradition of keeping their heritage and putting limits to it. And certainly it's much more difficult to work without the guidelines, because you can always, as you design, you can always say, well, the guidelines say that. I cannot do this. I cannot. It's easier when you have restrictions, when you have to put them on your own. Then the question of criteria comes into place, so the priorities come into place, and how honest you can be with yourself if you claim that you want to do something and nobody is watching, right? You can do whatever. But then if your process makes sense, you can be your own judge. It is okay if nobody is judging you, but you can be your own, not judge, it's a strong word, evaluator, or you can give yourself the guidelines and you can sleep well at night thinking you didn't damage too much. This is, and we have to be modest in that. It's very good. Wait, maybe we need to have somebody share the microphone.
Maybe I'll open with a few comments and a question. First, thank you for a very provocative presentation. I think you managed to treat the site as a site of heritage, even though it was not yet listed by the UNESCO. But I think the approach to heritage is that you intervene to create a reversible insertions. And I think what you chose to do here is rather to activate the space to become a site of living heritage. And I want to use your own words that you tried to interpret rather than wear the hat of Oscar Niemeyer and do what he would have done. So I think the interpretive part of the design process is extremely important, because there is a lot of you in it, and it's an added layer that only enriches it. So I appreciate that approach. But I wanted to also comment about this notion of archiving, because I work with that notion in city as archives. And I think what you managed to do is also use other buildings as archives. I mean, and your building now has become an archive for the rest of the grounds if they are to be renovated. So I think creating frames of references is part of why we use archives and narrate stories. So I think you should celebrate that. But from that departure point, I have a kind of critical question about the absence of the rest of the grounds in your presentations. You really treated it as an isolated object. And I'm a little surprised to see that, because the initial design was one of a master plan and a total sum of parts, but each part was celebrated. So can you elaborate on why the absence of the rest of the grounds and the master scheme and Tripoli today and how people would use it, all of that narrative which we usually use archives to articulate narratives, and I'm missing that narrative about the city and the grounds. Thank you.
It's a very, very valid question, Huwaida, thank you. We usually have a more comprehensive presentation that really talks about the context, but in the presence of George, we let him maybe introduce the fair at the beginning and then really focus let enough time for us to actually focus on the building itself. But definitely it's the fairgrounds as a site has always been understood as a park with objects in it. So the relationship between these objects is actually this liaison douce that Oscar Niemeyer, which is this landscape that actually ties it all together. And surprisingly, the guest house and its location is by itself isolated. Yeah, and it is located not too far from the entrance, but as a I would say almost a dweller or a passerby or someone who's experiencing the fair might very well just enter the fair and never see it. So it has actually a particular connotation whereby, without really wanting it, we did not isolate really the building from the rest of the fair, but it is physically isolated as well. In any case, usually the context layer, or really the proximity of the guest house to the rest of the pavilion is really part of really a larger whole, as you're saying, and it has never been, I would say, overlooked. But it just happens that we did not maybe express it enough. Thank you.
Hey, amazing project, and I think you guys did set guidelines on how to intervene architecturally and physically on a site of heritage, so thank you. I have a question. Program is a bit overlooked in your intervention. But it's that program that gave life to this pavilion. Do you think the intervention would have been the same if the program was different? Or is it something that you chose to ignore because you are setting guidelines no matter what the program is?
It's a great question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I have nothing else to add.
Design, I'm not. It's a very good question. That I'm sure every architect or designer at any level asks himself or herself. Is what we are doing completely relevant to all the criteria that we set, and would we have done differently if one of the elements was not there? I will sketch an answer. When you go through teaching, you start learning things. For example, when you are a student, you have one way of designing a project. You're given a brief, and then you say, okay, this is what I will design. And then when you are on the other side, you see that you have 35 very different answers to the same question. So there is a problem there, because if there is one good way to do it, you would have one answer and all the rest would be failing, right? So the whole thing is about what priorities you give yourself, what criteria you put the priority in the criteria to get to where you got. And if you put a little bit more criteria on this side, or more points, let's say, in your thinking, this is more important, this is important, your project goes in a direction. So perhaps in cases like this one, and maybe this ties a little bit to what Hueda was telling about, what is happening, you spoke only about this and that. It is that if the brief is to do something that is completely relevant for all the buildings, then maybe yes, they could, any architect could succeed in saying these are the guidelines. And now there is a project, with the Getty and about putting guidelines for the fair. Okay, I don't believe in these guidelines or in any guidelines for that matter if the person who is going to use these guidelines does not have these at the core of their thinking. So it's not about a checklist of things I am allowed to do and not allowed to do. So to return to your question, whenever any criteria in a design brief changes, most certainly the design will change in a way. Most certainly. So what they did is not a recipe for all the others, but the approach could be the same. But not the solution. I mean, the solution for lighting would be totally not valid in all the other buildings because of the structural system. The solution for the cladding would be also not valid. The solution for the landscape and so also not valid. You can take them one by one. But the attitude is valid. So the performance is valid, but not the recipe. There's no recipe, I think.
You have your answer. Yes.
So again, thank you for the presentation. I find your approach and intervention very refined. My question is, am I correct in understanding that to demonstrate the respect, you did not introduce any electromechanical systems except lighting?
We did insert lighting and ventilation systems in the workshop spaces that are all exposed. It actually might have shown in just one of the pictures, but the whole idea was to really expose all the systems. Sure.
So the question becomes, what's our stand with respect to respecting these buildings? Right? These were built at a time where conditions were different. People's response to places, to context, to interiors were different. Today we have different norms, different standards. Mm-hmm. Should these buildings adapt to what we expect them to do today or not? I refer particularly, for example, the roof, right? It's a solid concrete slab as a roof, which I expect would heat up a lot and create uncomfortable interior spaces.
Agreed.
So we're okay with that because we need to respect these buildings.
To a certain extent, I would say. Actually, we're entering into a new challenge of looking at the actual guest rooms that could maybe one day be occupied as guest rooms. So we're hoping that this is going to be an exercise that we will be undertaking soon. And this will be where the challenge presents itself, where how do you actually make those spaces comfortable enough to be inhabited by someone who would want to spend the night there. There are possibly ways to address it without really hindering the architecture, but again, it's really a research, and this is really the essence of, or I would say really the starting point of how we approached it from the very beginning. So it would require a substantial amount of research, understanding really passive systems, orientation, and all these things that could help in favor of maybe completely removing some actual mechanical systems from these to protrude inside these rooms. Maybe to think about really a new glass partition between those patios and the interior space in such a way where there is some sort of an internal mechanism to them that could allow for ventilation to happen naturally. But definitely, it's a very valid question.
And performance as a guideline.
And just to add on this point, the structures, not only for the guest house and the rest of the fair, I mean, the structural systems need to be in a way updated in some instances, and it's a question that a lot of people are questioning today, like how do we really put back a structure like this, I mean, to a standard that's acceptable today in the 21st century. Does respecting means not showing anything, like bringing it back to exactly what it should have been, or no, on the contrary, if you have to make it live another 50 years, you're going to have to maybe introduce new systems that are apparent and possibly very clearly apparent, maybe to differentiate or not. But I mean, these questions are being really asked right now, not by us only, by a lot of people, including Nari and the whole people behind the UNESCO document, actually, the World Heritage document.
Who has the mic?
I do.
Does anyone have a question? Because I'm dying to make a comment. No. As a heritage expert, I'm very much provoked by the question of Leah, and I feel that I want to jump in and answer because it is a great question. And we normally take two directions to heritage sites. We either restore them and turn them into frozen icons of the past, or we turn them into sites of living heritage. And to answer you, I think program is key to reconnect people to place in the sense of moral ownership over heritage, which is the first seed for sustainable living heritage to survive and be handed from one generation to the other and not be musified. And I'm from the school of thought that's against turning things to frozen icons to be consumed by the tourist industry, and here's a 19th century building and here's modern heritage. The program is one of the ways in which you bring these sites to life, but also to sustain through linking them with the community, because without ownership over a site, heritage will automatically die. So I think program is key into turning these heritage sites into sites of everydayness. I call it everydayness. So you're connected to be a productive site, you're connected to a community of carpenters, to the city of Tripoli, and that's when you start, back to George, to use it as an archival site to narrate the story of the city in general, or the context, or the people. So I think program is key, and if we link it to the local community, of course the program is better. If we link it to the tourist industry, then we doom it to be musified. So just wanted to answer you.
Thank you both for your presentation. Thank you, George, for the introductory notes. So I think my comment and question kind of links to both what Leah was saying and Huwaida was just saying at the moment. And in some respect, your intervention kind of gives the Tripoli Fair back to the public and the city, because it's being used for an everyday activity. It's being used by locals, and somewhat I see it as the potential beginning of really inhabiting and taking over the site again and integrating it back to the city. Then more like as a more speculative question, like now that you've done this first intervention in the Niemeyer Fair, what would you like to see happen? And I mean, you're now going to work on guidelines and publication. So, what would you like to see happen? And be developed moving forward? How would you envision the fair moving forward?
Thank you, Ola. Well, our own personal take on it is maybe to think of an incremental development that looks at punctual interventions rather than a total rehabilitation plan that doesn't necessarily might yield into a very sterile environment, as Huwaida was just saying. But moving away from this instead, maybe thinking that we can inject life in the fair strategically by maybe renovating the smallest pavilions first as really a tangible solution, because I mean the funds are not here, and the means aren't either. So I think that would be an interesting approach, to really think of a constellation of interventions that together could allow for Tripolitans and Lebanese to reclaim the site. And we both feel, Charles and I, that the guest house in itself is maybe one of them, right? Today, very particularly, is used as really a wood-making space, but maybe tomorrow could be regain its original use, which is an actual guest house, maybe a space of domesticity, and then relocating the workshop itself somewhere else. I think really the approach is really at the micro level than really at the macro level.
I would like to see the restaurant work. And there is a reason, because you can have great traditional food in a concrete building. And there is this trend now, like Ziad Rahbani's plays, بدك شلال والصخر وما بعرف شو, to eat a good tabbouleh or a good mishwi and كذا. But imagine this fabulous restaurant, it is 360 degrees, you have a slit view, and then the next time you come, you sit on the other side, you see Mina, and the third time you come, because the food is very good, you go to the other side, and this will bring money. So developing the place is not only about the miserable people of Tripoli, it's also about the people of Tripoli who can also contribute with pleasure in renovating. And this will bring some income to people who will work in this restaurant, and everybody that will, the agriculture, little things. And not only the little pavilion, of course, as an exhibition, but also things that function and that are needed. We don't need to invent a huge program like they did for the site behind the boomerang and go and dig, and sorry for those who won the competition. Dig all this and build all of these square meters while you have all these square meters built and empty. I thought it was a ridiculous competition and brief and what have you.
Which one?
Just to go do the restaurant.
Speaking, if I may, firstly, thank you very much for a fascinating and refreshing intervention from all of you separately and together. And it's been very informative. I was very excited when we got the award. And I'm very happy that your project has actually brought the site to life, irrespective of whether it's one fraction of the site or it's the beginning. And as this being, having as your project becoming in a way a catalyst for this initiative of bringing back life and kind of in a very convincing way, not because it got the AlHandassah award, but because it's functioning and it's very beautiful, and because of the respect to the various, because of the research that you have done in the process, which is what I suppose heritage is about, and how, as you say, it contributes to design. But what is the bigger program? Is there a program? I know George is very much involved in this. Is there a program now that this catalyst has happened as a point of reference? Is there an incentive after UNESCO? I know that UNESCO putting something on the World Heritage list doesn't get anything anywhere, but I mean, has this not encouraged kind of other investors to come and discuss? No? There are so many things that need to be answered and that need
I'm not aware of holistic vision, programmatic vision. Every now and then, for example, the last project we heard about was already a few years ago. It was Chinamex. Chinamex would be using the whole fair to exhibit Chinese industry to the whole Mediterranean. They were looking for...
I'm talking about now, after this event.
After this is a very private little, association, French association that targeted the building and the carpenters in Tripoli and the designers, and they made it, and that's it. It was not part of something that is larger.
Is there a way where you might collectively or jointly look at getting funding to tackle other parts of the project? Like the restaurant?
It is possible. We applied once to a grant that we didn't get. Actually, the idea was precisely to renovate one building, the little building, right? But we didn't get it. But we might next time get it. But thinking of hundreds of millions of dollars to renovate the whole thing at once, what I think should be very, Salma, the most important thing to do, I think, is to think at various levels and speeds. At daily level, at monthly level, at seasonal level, at yearly level, at 5-year programs, and so on. While you're thinking of big things, little things can happen. People in Tripoli have been doing little exhibitions with no means, paper industry and whatever and so on. This never really worked, or even an exhibition, of books and so on. On the other hand, you have the creative industry who use the space for concerts, and this is good, I think. It brings the youth, and they love it. There's something surreal about it that people like and love. A lot of people do films there, advertisements, all sorts of things. This can go along with other things. So one has to map everything possible. But there is a structural problem, which is who is in charge, who makes the decisions. With all due respect, people who are in charge think too big or don't think. This is why these things don't happen.
George, it's following up, this idea of the restaurant and this idea of, and I think it's the importance of every project is driven by also the client, what the client wants, or the type of approaches that the client would be open to, as something that really sometimes drives attitudes to projects, because we are, at the end of the day, working with clients to do these interesting approaches. So would the project being listed as World Heritage drive out, for example, clients that might want to revive the Lebanese, identity to bring a restaurant or something? Like, I'm really wondering whether they had. I'm sure they had, an excellent receptive client to, appreciate attitudes to.
Yes, but it's about negotiating what you could do. Of course, you put guidelines on what to do with a building like the restaurant, but then it needs to work. So with wise people on the decision part and wise people as clients and wise people as architects, things can happen. It's not so difficult, I think. It's not so difficult, but yes,
because you just
client
drives things perspective of a super scary project like earlier that might be driven by clients that you might find in
now
Tripoli.
that you are on the list, on the World Heritage list, there are guidelines. There are شو بسموهم جارد فو، شو بتقول بالانجليزي ما بعرف. جارد فو يعني مثل هدول الجيرزي على الاوتوستراد، درايفنج على الاوتوستراد، درايفنج اوكي، في هذه الحديده اللي بتمنعك تتهوري يعني.
Safety ratings.
Just to follow up on that, who is actually making those decisions? Because it seems like the fantastic approach of this renovation is the replicability of the approach and the method. And we've been, it's a testament to the huge talent that it's in the country, the possibilities that can happen if the site is treated with the necessary respect and what we were talking about before. But I'm dying to ask, like, now it's on the World Heritage List, but what kind of governance is the Tripoli Fair under, and who is making those decisions moving forward? Is there any intervention or advocacy that needs to happen at the level of decision making in the fair to be able to ensure that, you know, there is a proper custody over the site, and that you know, renovation happens in the form that, you know, I don't know who thinks needs to happen, and what kind of role do the people actually have, the people of Tripoli, whether there is any sort of...
No role.
Yeah, this is the question. I mean, we're thinking
them.
about design, but we're also, you know, moving forward. It's a very nice idea to think about how now this renovation, with its involvement of the Tripoli people and success, kind of to reflect moving forward. Thank you.
Yes, now in terms of governance, it is the actual government that is in charge through the Minister of Economy, Economy or Finance. I mean, it is under the auspices, you say, of one of those ministries. Sorry, I forgot which one. And for example, when the information technology project was put forth, it was the government. It was the, you know. So I think that these projects are possible precisely because nobody is really in charge in a way. Because if you have the money, you have a vision, again, a vision, visionary architect, visionary client, visionary contractor also, and so on, you can do it. This is what Lebanon is good about. Nobody's in charge.
It's true.
It's true. It's very true what you're saying, George, but there's one thing that perhaps allowed this project to happen. It's European money, and it's a French agency who implemented it. So when it comes to negotiating with the Lebanese government or whoever is taking the decision at the fair, it's much easier coming as the EU and the French agency than the Lebanese entity, and that's so unfortunate, right? This is how things are done. So perhaps today the hope is still to wait for foreign money and foreign initiatives to be able to make things advance. I mean,
We'll take one last question.
Thank you so much for the presentation. When we go back to the design bit, in Tripoli, I think most of workshops are on the street level and they're very porous. What was the biggest challenge of integrating such a porous and extroverted program into a very introverted fort in a way?
What's very particular about the guest house is the paradox between the opaqueness versus the openness that you experience as soon as you enter, right? And the feeling of experiencing a space which is flooded with diffused light automatically allows for a porosity and really for a sense of openness. But it might be that this paradox that you're actually talking about made you think that it's almost like a bunker, right? Like a completely closed off building, which is true, which is the first thing that you actually see. But as soon as you enter it, the feeling of it is completely distorted, I would say, and you're immediately immersed in this really sense of openness that could maybe refer to this idea of porosity and allowing for, I would say, a comfortable sequence of spaces to actually allow and unfold around this atrium. Did I answer your question?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to congratulate, of course, Nicola and Charles on winning the award and basically on designing and implementing such a fantastic project. And thank you for the presentation. Thank George for the moderation, engaging all of us in this wonderful presentation discussion. Thank the audience for joining us for our closing act for the semester. And big hands to the designers.